Hello and welcome to Note Doctors. My name is Paul.
My name is Jenn.
My name is Ben.
And we are your hosts. We are all university music theory instructors who are passionate about music theory and music theory instruction. In this podcast, we will be talking about all things theory with some of the best music theory teachers in the country. If you want to know more about music theory and the most effective and innovative ways to teach it, this is the podcast for you. Well, welcome back, listeners. We are here in 2021 with our very first episode of the year. We're so pleased to have as our first guest of 2021, Danny Jenkins. So Ben, tell us a little bit about Dr. Jenkins.
Danny Jenkins is Associate Professor of Music Theory at the University of South Carolina. He has published research on Elliott Carter, Arnold Schoenberg, and public music theory. A dedicated pedagogue, Jenkins has received teaching awards from the Eastman School of Music, the University of Rochester, and the University of South Carolina.
The important question, and the first question that I asked is, well, what is it that they want to learn about, right? Instead of thinking of music theory, instead of thinking as public music theory, and that music theory is this fixed body of knowledge that you can deliver to people and they can receive, think of it as public music theory. Like, what is the segment of the public that I'm interested in working with, and how might I be able to use my music theoretical knowledge and skills to help that segment of the public? I think when you ask the question that way, then all different kinds of things pop into your mind.
So today our very special guest is Danny Jenkins, and he's coming to us from the University of South Carolina, the East Coast, USC, right? I guess.
That's right.
And we just wanted to open up with kind of asking you a little bit about how you got started into theory. Was it a 7th grade career aptitude test that you took that kind of told you, music theory is the way to go, or was there something a little bit more intuitive?
It's funny that you mentioned 7th grade. That's when I grew up in Kentucky. And in the county I grew up in, that was when you started band. And I had piano lessons. My mother had put me in piano lessons when I was about 9. And so they give you this test and they ask you which pitch is higher and which pitch is lower. Perhaps some of you have taken that same test. And so I scored fairly well. And I said, I want to be a percussionist. They said, no, you'll play French horn, or it was not going to be percussion. But what happened was I actually went to Catholic school, which didn't have a band program. So to be in band, I had to go to the public school 1 hour a day. And in the 7th grade, that 7th grade band class conflicted with religion class at the Catholic school. And so my father and mother thought, well, perhaps if we're investing in your religious education, it wouldn't be the best idea for you to miss your religious class. So So then in the 8th grade, they got a new band director at that school, and my mother called her and said, my son really loves music. He's had piano lessons, and this year, now in 8th grade, band does not conflict with religion class. Would you consider letting him into the band in the 8th grade? And she said, well, he's had piano lessons. I don't have any percussionists. Would he be willing to play percussion? So careful what you wish for, I guess. But yeah, so my first instrument was percussion. I went to the University of Kentucky, got a bachelor's degree in music education, went back to my old high school and was the assistant band director there for 3 years,
Wow.
Which is a really wonderful experience. And it was a very active program, the marching band just if those of you who have band experience know how intense that experience can be. And at that school, it was very intense. Yeah. But at the end of 3 years, I was ready to move forward with music theory. I had really fallen in love with music theory as an undergraduate student. They had a music theory award that I had won as an undergraduate. And I just really felt that that's what I wanted to do, was be a music theory professor. So I went to the University of Louisville and got a master's in music theory and composition. And it was actually at Louisville that I started singing. I had an ensemble requirement for my master's degree. And I had been in church choir, but I had never been in a collegiate choir or choir at that level. And I thought that would be an important thing for my musicianship. Mm-hmm. So joined the choir, started singing, went on to Eastman to do my PhD. And it was actually at Eastman that I started studying voice privately. And I studied as a countertenor.
Oh, wow.
I was not accepted into a studio at Eastman. I want to make that clear. I studied with a graduate student, but he was an excellent teacher. And so I really consider countertenor my main performing medium at this point. Although, I can, I'm a theory teacher, piano player, and a couple of years ago, I did dust off the mallet bag and do a marimba trio with a couple of other faculty members. But, I think while I'm a jack of all trades, master of none, these skills have served me very well as a music theory teacher. Both the rhythm skills from my percussion training and then also the way my ear developed from singing. So I'm very grateful for all those different experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I think with a theory teacher, it's not the person who's most furthest away from making music. This person has to really know it all and has to be able to make it and sing it and play. And so I love hearing the stories of theorists and really how well versed they are in not just theory, but they can perform a little bit. They can compose. I think that's great, and I think that kind of takes away the stereotype of just this kind of pencil and paper musician that a theory teacher often is.
Definitely.
I think it's interesting too how many of us start out music ed. I started out music ed, and so did Ben, and several other of our guests have started out that way too. And because really what we do is still music education. It's just not at the high school or elementary level, right? It's just at a different level. So
absolutely. And that training, not just the music training, but the education training has served me very well as well. And
Same.
So I've always been extremely grateful for that degree and for those 3 years teaching high school. That has been invaluable to me in learning how to work with people, how to motivate. I mentioned in one of my job interviews at some point, they said, well, what did you learn from teaching high school band? And I said, well, when you're teaching high school band, your professional success is at the whims of 13-year-olds. So you learn a lot of good people skills. This is kind of a cakewalk in a way compared to that. So
yeah, that was going to be my reaction about connecting to people and connecting across all of these quote unquote boundaries of choir people, quote unquote, versus band people versus the percussion guy. We've all heard them, but just to be able to reach out and connect and really genuinely understand what's going on to each of your students. I mean, it's invaluable, really.
Yeah.
So we wanted to talk to you specifically about your work with public music theory. We might want to just start off with defining what that means, because that might be a topic that's new to some. I remember in graduate school never hearing the term public music theory ever come up. And so, what is that? How did you get started in doing that? And how has that kind of transformed your teaching?
I think my interest in public music theory began through my work on Schoenberg. I edited a collection of Schoenberg's program notes and analyses of his own music. And as part of the editorial process, I needed to contextualize these documents for people. And some of these were letters. Some of them were short analytical excerpts in textbooks. But many of them, I was struck by how many of them were written for a public audience in mind. There were program notes. There were radio lectures. There were record jacket liner notes. There was even a script for a television program that was going to be on the BBC that never got recorded. So, the perception of Schoenberg as someone who didn't care, I don't care if you listen, that kind of perception was just completely obliterated through my research. And so I started thinking, well, who else has tried to do this, has tried to reach out and get an audience to better understand. I immediately, of course, think of Leonard Bernstein. But I just started looking for everything I could find, podcasts, YouTube channels, books, going back into the history. Public musicology was already a term at that point. So there was a lot of information or more information about public musicology. And I started thinking about, well, how does public musicology and public music theory are they the same thing? Do they intersect? Are they completely distinct? So I decided to teach a course in the fall of 2016 that I called Public Music Theory. And I wrote an article about that course that people can read in Engaging Students. And at that time, my idea of public music theory was, what are media or ways of delivery that people who know music theory can communicate to people who don't know music theory? That was pretty much my vision of what this was. And now my definition of what music theory in that context was, I think, was broader than some people's definition of music theory. But it was very much, my models in my mind was the sage on the stage approach, Schoenberg, Bernstein. Someone, you go and they tell you what all this means, and you receive that knowledge. But coincidentally, in the fall of 2016, I also started teaching music theory at Lee Correctional Facility in Bishopville, South Carolina. And through that experience, working with the men at Lee, I have a much broader understanding of public music theory. And so public music theory involves engaging with public partners. That can be one way that you interpret public music theory. And it's also, to me, all these little, I like to call them music theories, but the ways that people conceive of music and have conceptions of music. I think there are daily millions of little public theories that happen as people listen to the radio or stream something. And, so the work in music cognition, I think, is very valuable to a deeper understanding of public music theory as well.
Yeah, I sent Jenn and Ben your Engaging Students article before we had our chat here, and I love the opening link that you have with the Family Guy, with Stewie singing that song, and I'm home, then I'm going away, and he goes to like the minor six, and that's music theory right there in Family Guy.
Yeah, and that happened. I was teaching sophomore theory. And we were talking about modulation, and I wanted them to understand the concept of monotonality. That yes, you modulate away, but eventually you come back. And that home metaphor has been made many times. But I had seen that clip watching Family Guy and had stored it in my brain. And just the kind of world we live in, I just stopped teaching class and I went over to the computer and I found the clip on YouTube and I played it, and they got it immediately. And so I consider that a moment of public music theory, and that's when this issue of intention started to play, because Bernstein and Schoenberg, they have intentions to be public music theorists. I don't think that Seth MacFarlane had an intention to be a public music theorist. I think that he and his creative team were reacting to an experience they've had listening to music. Seth MacFarlane is actually a fairly good musician himself. So I just thought this is something that's accessible to and geared to a general audience. And so for me, it's an example of public music theory.
I think that's great. I'm wondering, so, when I think about taking music theory out into the world, there's lots of ideas that come up in my mind, but maybe the first one isn't like a prison, a correctional facility, right? So how did you end up there? What took you to that program, and how did you get connected with it?
I first became aware of that of the music program at Lee Correctional Facility in the spring of 2016. I had a colleague who, she's now my colleague. At the time, she wasn't, but her name is Claire Bryant, and she is our cello professor. But at that time, she was living in New York and gigging around, and she was a member of Dakota, which is the affiliate ensemble with Carnegie Hall. And one of their projects was Music for Transformation, which is their prison project. And they had done some things at Sing Sing, but they wanted to find something outside of the New York City area. And Claire happens to be from Camden, South Carolina. And Bishopville, where Lee Correctional is not very far from there. So she had become aware that they already had an inmate-run music program at the facility. And so she went to visit. And Dakota started doing, I think in 2013, these annual songwriting residencies with the inmates that were just really impressive. And so in the spring of 2016, a colleague of mine went and watched a couple of days of the residency. And she came back to me and she told me what was happening. and she said, I talked to the music leaders, the two men who are running, the inmates that are running the music program, and I said, what is it that you really need? And they said, we want to know more about music theory. And I just thought, well, that's something that I know. That's something that I can do. There's a lot of things I can't do, but that is definitely something I can do. So it just started with grabbing some, out of print textbooks off the shelf and donating them. But then that summer, the summer of 16, I attended one of their concerts. They do a couple of concerts a year. And it's just to give people the image of this, kind of the central part of the music making is a rock band setup, lead guitar, bass guitar, keys, drums. Mm-hmm. But they do a variety of genres of music. I mean, at one of their concerts, you'll hear covers, you'll hear original songs, you'll hear metal, hip hop, country, folk rock, blues, R&B, you name it, it's whatever people's musical tastes are, they're doing it. It was an incredibly inspirational experience. And so after that concert, I spoke with the two music leaders, and they said, we would love to get some more music theory lessons sometime. And so Lee Correctional is an hour away, and I know in Texas distance that's not far, but in South Carolina that's far.
That's half the state, isn't it?
I was really grateful when the University of South Carolina the School of Music purchased the same teleconferencing software that the prison uses. And so we were able to start doing classes through teleconferencing. And I started with just the two music leaders. And that was the fall of 16. In the spring of 17, we added a beginner's class that one of my graduate students taught. And then by the fall of 18, I took a group of students to the prison, which we can talk about that experience a little bit more. But so it was just this, I just lucked into this situation where people were asking for music theory knowledge. And
that doesn't happen every day.
It doesn't happen every day. And so
I'm rarely approached about my music theory knowledge.
No, it doesn't happen every day. Although I will say, I was out in LA, and I went to the Paramount Studios tour, and I was talking to this woman who was, selling me my ticket, and she said, well, where are you from? And she's just chatting me up. And I said, I live in South Carolina. And I said, I'm a music theory professor. She goes, oh, music theory. She's like, I need to know more about music theory. and I said, well, why? What is it that you want to know? And she said, well, I want to do songwriting. And I said, well, what kind of music do you like? And she started telling me, Hamilton. I love Hamilton. I said, well, have you seen these series of videos on YouTube that they analyze Hamilton from a music theory perspective? I think that would be a really good place for you to start. So, I just thought, wow, this is so great. These moments keep happening. But I think what your question is, how would you go about maybe seeking one of these kinds of relationships or experiences?
Yeah.
And I think that, there's a few different ways to do it. One of the other examples of public music theory that I do here in Columbia is I work, I teach some classes at the Lurie Senior Center, which is it's not a residential center. It's a day center, and they contacted me. I don't know how they found out about me, but they regularly do classes, like these 4-week classes, and they said, would you be interested in teaching one? And so then the question, I think if you're ever presented with that kind of situation, the important question, and the first question that I asked is, well, what is it that they want to learn about, right? Instead of thinking of music theory, instead of thinking as public music theory, and that music theory is this fixed body of knowledge that you can deliver to people and they can receive, think of it as public music theory. Like, what is the segment of the public that I'm interested in working with, and how might I be able to use my music theoretical knowledge and skills to help that segment of the public? I think when you ask the question that way, then all different kinds of things pop into your mind.
Public music and the theory even. it takes more of a backseat. I think music has to be also before the theory as well, but I don't know. I don't want to interrupt.
No, absolutely. I think that absolutely, very good point. Because at Lee Correctional, the kind of music making that was going on there was, not music that is in general well served by the theoretical training that I've had. And so when we started the beginning classes, I'm here in my office at the university, and I look at this bookshelf behind me that's loaded with undergraduate textbooks. And very few, I would say perhaps none of them really served me well as I was thinking about, okay, what is a beginning music theory class going to mean for this student population? And what is it going to mean for the graduate student that has to teach it? And so when those questions became the initial questions, or the most important questions, then the world of music theory just opens up so much bigger, and you have just a more encompassing understanding of what we mean when we say music theory. But I agree with you. The issue of serving the music and serving the public is really important.
Yeah, totally.
I've thought many times about how our curriculum is often very sort of keyboard driven or written notation driven. And it has to be, if our students are going to go out and pursue careers in music, they have to be really competent at all of those things. But many of the students that come into my program, we have a large music business program. A lot of them are really extremely proficient guitarists. And they end up, of course, having to take like fundamentals because they don't read staff notation, even though maybe their ear is very developed or their, ideas about music are very developed. And my colleague here and I have talked many times about how do we develop a fundamentals class that will serve those students better and capitalize on the things they already know, rather than taking them from a position of, well, you got into our program, you play really well, we're excited about your skills, but now we're going to sit you down and tell you that you actually don't know anything at all, and you're going to have to start at zero and learn like A, B, C, D. They do have to learn that, but they do know a lot. How can we capitalize on that? I think that's, when I think about inmates in a prison who are making music and really excited about making music, probably a lot of them have that sort of experience. They're guitarists, or they just have a natural ear about it, and learning to capitalize that is the best kind of teaching, I think.
Yeah, and I have thought about this issue a lot, about the necessity of staff notation. And for certain musicians, it may not even be necessary for them to read staff notation. I think it's important for them to know staff notation. But to be a kind of fluent reader of staff notation, that may not be the most important thing for their music making. I've been thinking about that a lot because we've added musical theater and music industry degrees. And we're going to start accepting students into those degrees in fall of 2021. And so thinking about our curriculum and how well it would serve that student population is really being informed by my experience at Lee Correctional. I think there's certain kind of fundamentals that we do want them to know, but I also think, it just allows us to rethink things that we think are very, very important. And maybe Absolutely. That knowledge can be demonstrated in other ways. Maybe that competency can be demonstrated in other ways. So yeah, it's something I'm thinking a lot about as well.
Yeah. Some schools solve the problem by having the students separate. There's separate tracks for music theory. The theater people, the industry people take one kind of music theory and the other students take another kind. We don't do that. And I'm actually really glad we don't, because our students all mix together in this sort of wonderful way here. And we end up with, a couple of years ago, we had a music business major who wrote a musical in collaboration with one of our composition students, and then a really fine harpist and pianist, right? So all sorts of mixing together that might not have happened if they hadn't been sitting next to each other in 8 o'clock music theory, So I like that they're all in the same room, but it does create that challenge of how do we prepare all of them for the things that they need, and not just the ones that look the most like me, maybe, the ones whose careers are on the same trajectory that mine has had,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the other thing is, we don't know what their career trajectories are going to be.
Exactly. They don't either.
When I went to undergrad, I was not going to be a music theorist,
Same.
Yep.
And so I've been thinking a lot about that too, about, is there a kind of sweet spot of a very generalist music theory that's maybe 1 or 2 semesters that would really benefit all of the musicians, and what do we allow, or what is it within the curriculum that we maybe de-emphasize that has been emphasized in order to make room for that?
Yep.
And just making peace with that, like that's going to have to happen, and that's okay.
Yep.
Because there are other benefits on the other side.
Yeah, it's like we've all been gifted this like Fabergé egg, and this, like, just be careful with it. Don't drop it. It has to stay exactly the same. And I think it's great to hear all these voices are like, no, we need to maybe not smash the egg. The metaphor is breaking down, but really think outside the box. So I'm curious, what music theory did the inmates at Lee Correctional Facility want to learn? What were the kind of theory topics that really resonated with them, or they're really excited to understand?
Well, the beginning class kind of runs through some similar thing. They go through a cycle, and people kind of come in and they learn that, and then they might move up to the advanced class. But it's focused, the beginning class is focused a lot on rhythm and meter, like being able to tell if something is in a, what we would say is in simple or compound meter, but we talk about feels instead of that, different terminology for that. And basic things like, can you feel the beat? And if you can feel the beat, how is that beat divided? How do you groove? How would you groove to this? We teach the Nashville number system. So there needs to be an understanding of chord or triad. But that doesn't have to be like 3 notes stacked on a staff, right? Like that's a very convenient visual for someone who's learning to play the keyboards in the band. But if you're learning to play guitar in the band, that is not necessarily the most important visual. And so, we do have keyboard handouts, we have fretboard handouts, and kind of thinking about these things in different ways and letting people kind of come to them through, and they will often offer ideas that are very interesting. And I think validating those ideas and building on them is a really important part of that process. The advanced class, these are extremely talented musicians. And so we've done a variety of things. We usually start each semester and I say, okay, what do you guys want to do? One semester, it was all about, they wanted to learn classical form. That's just what they wanted to do. Wow. So I was like, well, that's something I can definitely do, And so by the end of the semester, we were looking at, some sonata form movements, wow. I'm sure some of the ones you all taught. Yeah. I remember we did the Mozart F major that has that descending fifth sequence, and it's got all those seventh chords, including the 7/7 and the 3/7 and the 6/7. And one of them said, "Now, Danny, you told us classical composers didn't use them kind of chords." They were, because I said, well, in classical music, it's really 2/7, 5/7, but not really like 7/7 or like major 7/7 or 3/7. And, and they called me on the carpet, for that, which I really appreciated. It showed me a lot about the biases I was bringing to the situation. But the project we were doing with the advanced class before the pandemic hit was the University of South Carolina School of Music had been able to donate a computer to the music program at the correctional facility that included GarageBand and Finale and some other things. And so we were doing a project with our wind ensemble director. We took a small wind group to the facility in the fall of, what year are we on now? Sorry, the pandemic has gotten me on this. So this was the fall of 19.
Fall of 19.
We took a small wind ensemble and we played a concert. And in the advanced class that semester, we had been talking about instrument transpositions and writing for the instruments that were going to be available. And they had written some short pieces, and they were learning to use finale in the process. And it was just a completely different way of thinking for them. You know, if you've played piano or guitar all your life, and all of a sudden this idea of like a single line instrument is such a challenge. And like, you know, well, how can I get it to sound like this? Or how can I get it to sound like that? And we had so many conversations around timbre and articulation and dynamics and these kinds of things that sometimes sometimes fall out of the curriculum. Mm-hmm. And we were planned to do a concert of their pieces in the spring of 20, but the pandemic hit. So I'm really hopeful that, we can get on the other side of this and that we can do that. I know that they were really excited about it. The students who had gone were really excited about it. So, but yeah, those are the kind of things. They just kind of tell me like what they want to do. You know, like this one semester, it was just like modal jazz. They wanted to do modal jazz, which is something I didn't know very much about. So I had to get educated, and I really appreciated that.
Yeah. That's really great. There was one Theory 3 or something one year where I asked them at the beginning of the year, what is it that you want to learn? Like, you've had 2 semesters in music theory. What are you still like? When is she going to tell us about this? You know? And some of the answers I got, I was like, oh no, how am I going to teach you that? Like, I remember there were several along the theme of like, how do I write a song that speaks to someone's soul? And I'm like, I don't know. We don't normally teach that, but I'm like, well, okay. So I got to think about it now. I asked them what they wanted to learn. And if I'm just like, that's no good. So,
well, that's an excellent example of a public music theory question, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like, how is music theory going to touch somebody? You know, why does music make us cry? I mean, these are great public music theory questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes, I
really
find
good.
that some of my student-generated questions, like you're saying, Jen and Danny both, that often are like tags on the end of a lesson. You know, like you have that extra 5 or 10 minutes and you're just communicating, you're discussing something that a student wrote. Something comes up, this really great question, and then you want to do a mini lecture, you know, or another composition activity. I find the next semester that becomes like the main starting point for like that entire talk, you know, because that was such a good question by the student that it almost kind of transforms the way you do it the next time, in my case at least.
Yeah. I did sort of farm that one back out to them. I think I created a little project where I made them like find a song that really has spoken to you, and you have to analyze the song and talk about like, what is it? Right. What is the moment that hits you in that song or whatever? And a lot of it was use of 7th chords, modal mixture, you know, a lot of them chose popular music examples, and that was what was getting them, were those sorts of things. But yeah, when you ask them what they want to know, it's always, what comes back to you is always really interesting. And I think you're right, Ben, it often ends up being a part of what you do on and on and on from there.
And I think we can all think of those pieces for ourselves. You know, when we were, not quite sure that this music theory was for us, that there were certain pieces that we just thought, oh my gosh, I have to know more about what's making that tick or why it's making me feel the way it does. So I think that's a really great project that you were able to do with your students.
It went well.
Yeah, I have to say,
I haven't used
Jenny,
it again though in a while. Maybe I'll pull that one back out this spring.
I was going to say, listening to the group, the collaboration between the students and the inmates, I thought the result was fantastic. There was a video clip that we watched before, and I thought, wow, this is really impressive because, you know, I couldn't really tell, for example, oh, that's definitely the USC students or something like that. I thought, wow, this group sounds great, and I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah. So just to give a little context to the listeners, in fall 2018, I taught a course on rhythm and meter, a graduate course here at the University of South Carolina. And then I also, the advanced class at Lee, their topic was rhythm and meter that semester. And near the end of the semester, the 2 classes met through video conferencing. And we wrote some songs together. Really, the men kind of started the songs and then gave them to us, and then we kind of arranged around the songs or added, maybe a verse or something like that. But this was an incredibly successful project that we did, because we eventually went to the facility and we all performed together. And you know, I had the students at the end of that semester write reflections on their experience, and it was just so beneficial for me to read what they had learned, both musical and extra musical, from that experience. And I remember specifically, we had a student, he's an organist in town. He's a really fine organist. He had never listened to any rap or hip hop in his life. And as we were video conferencing, the men said, you know, this song, we should have some rap breaks in this song. Or, you know, somebody should drop a 16. That's the term. Somebody should drop a 16 here. And they were like, do some of the students want to do that? And this organist came to me and he said, I really want to do this. He said, I know that it's way outside of my comfort zone, and I just really want to do this. And so he wrote a rap, and he went there and he performed it. He had some difficulties, but, you know, he pulled himself back together and he had that experience, and he just wrote about what a great experience that was. And, you know, they could tell. I remember there was one point where they could tell that he was like getting nervous about it. And one of the inmates just came up to him and they said, hey man, country boys can rap too. It was just like this just really beautiful moment of like, we're going to have this shared, you know, musical experience today. And so many of the students commented on that. They didn't feel this pressure to perform perfectly, that they feel so much of the time. And it was such a joyous experience because it was so participatory. That kind of anxiety that comes with, you know, doing a perfect performance was lifted off their shoulders. So I was really pleased with that experience.
I love that so much because I love it when students are willing to risk, like to take a risk and just try it. Because you don't know how it's going to turn out, and that's okay. And college is the perfect time to make those types of risks and try things out, very low stakes. And so I love the image of a rapping organist. I think that's awesome. I just love that. Yeah. And so, what kind of preconceived notions did you have going into that whole project? Were there some preconceptions that were kind of totally false? That you came in thinking, okay, I'm going to be maybe at the stage on the stage, or, you know, this, and it's totally that. And, you know, you've obviously shared some things where you're learning from them almost as much as, you know, they're learning from you. But what are some of the ways that you've really kind of changed, maybe in your teaching and also just like in how you live based off of these experiences?
When I first knew I was going to start doing these classes in the fall of 2016, I had it in my head that we were going to start with the Nashville number system. I'm like, this will be great. This is exactly what they need, you know? And so I had the first class with the two music leaders, and I'm like, okay, I got something to show you all. This is going to just really help you out, you know, in your music making at Lee. And you can't share screen because there's all kinds of security things. So you have to just hold handouts up to the camera. And I said, you know, this is called the and they let me go on for just long enough, and they're like, we got that. Like that's the lingua franca around here. You know, everybody knows that. And it just hit home to me that I had conceived of this situation as that I was someone who had knowledge and that they were people that were going to receive knowledge. It was just very clear to me, embarrassingly so, that that's, you know, how I had conceived of the situation. Yeah. And so I just had to back up, and I was like, okay, so let's just talk, you know, tell me what you know about, what you're interested in. I'm ashamed to say that wasn't the first thing I did, but I think it speaks to the way I was kind of conceiving this whole idea of public music theory and how much my ideas about it have changed through those experiences. Yeah,
I think about all of us as we're teaching theory, it's about the score, right? What's more valuable than showing you this score, this notation? And okay, that's nice, but what does it sound like? How do I play it? All these other things are more important questions, you know?
Yeah, you're reminding me of an experience I had at Lee one time. I was down there for one of the Dakota residencies, and there was a gentleman who I had never seen him before, and I've been there several times and had a good idea of the men who were kind of around the music program. So, but people come in and out. Some people get out, which is great, and some new people come in. But anyway, he was a gentleman I hadn't seen before, and he was rapping. And he had set up his rap in his kind of very traditional, like, just very reliable. And then he had 3 lines that were in this compound feel in the middle of it. It was like da 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 da. And every time he would get there, he would mess up, and he started getting anxious and angry and frustrated. So Claire, my cello colleague, she said, could you maybe take him aside? And we just kind of sat down, and I said, well, tell me about, so his text was the words, right? He had written down the words, and that was not just the text, it was the musical text, right? For him, that was a musical text. And so I was like, well, tell me about, first of all, do you hear that that's a different feel? And so I kind of said, this is what I'm hearing when you're doing this. Do you hear that as a different feel? He said, yeah, that's the place where I have to catch my breath. So he was conceiving of this fewer divisions per beat as a kind of way of catching his breath, which is his expression in my mind of, the notes are just not moving as fast, right? Mm-hmm. And so I said, okay. I said, well, let's talk about how's that different from the other section. And I finally got him to see that, sometimes he's like defaulting to 4 divisions per the beat, and sometimes he's defaulting to 3 divisions for the beat. And we did like little L and J dots so that he could kind of see that. And so we bracketed that out. And I said, so when you get there, just remember that's where, when you catch your breath, that's where you're going to feel 3 things. So let's have a different physicality for that. So he was like bobbing his head one way for one section. And then when he got to that section, it was more like a side to side bob. So there's this embodiment of the whole thing. Wow. And so it was, it's just to go, he didn't need staff notation. He didn't need our traditional rhythmic notation. He had a kind of theory of that moment, and we fleshed that out together. And that was a really great experience.
Well, we are, unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our time already. I could ask more questions and talk.
I know. I think we got through like one question from the actual.
There's something else you really. I'm sorry. I can be quite verbose. Is there something else you want me to answer and do like some short clips for you?
Well, we have time for the rapid fire, I think. And so let's see. Jenn or Ben, either of you want to go first, or?
I am scrolling.
You're scrolling
down to the bottom.
I can go first. So what is your go-to not something you would use in class necessarily, like just the thing that's playing on repeat on your phone or whatever right now?
You mean like what am I listening to?
I almost use the term like guilty pleasure music, but I kind of hate that term because I think it's all okay. I think it's all good.
I'm really bad person to ask this question because all of my listening time usually goes to podcasts. So
there's nothing wrong with that, Danny, at all.
I'm that way too.
So I just devour lots and lots of podcasts.
Okay, then favorite podcast.
But I did receive Jonas Kaufmann's Christmas album for Christmas, and I know that was getting maligned on Facebook for a single track, but the rest of it is really wonderful, actually. So I've enjoyed listening to that.
Yeah, I saw that was going around YouTube. That was pretty great, but I'm glad the rest of the album is good. All right, my question. This is a new one. I don't think I've ever asked this. Schenker or Riemann?
So my personal conception of tonality is much more Schenkerian tonality. I know, of course, Schoenberg's theory quite intimately. But I think when I am confronted with tonal music that I have not heard before, I default to a Schenkerian mode of hearing. So I'd have to go with Schenker.
Excellent. Excellent. All right,
I'm
Ben.
also going off the book from our post. I want to know if you could add one musical theater piece to the canon, what would it be?
One musical theater piece to the canon? It would probably have to be West Side Story, I think. Yeah. It's incredibly rich musically. I think it's Leonard Bernstein's true masterpiece, actually. That's a very hard question for me. I really enjoy musical theater repertoire quite a lot. But that I'd have to say West Side Story.
Yeah, it's definitely out of my area of expertise, so I was just curious to ask some people as I run across them what they want to add.
I gave a public music theory talk before a screening of West Side Story once, so I've even kind of thought about how do you get this across. It was during the Bernstein Centenary, and the art house in town was screening West Side Story, so I got to give this 10-minute public music theory lecture. I say, now listen for these things when you're watching the movie. And I had people come up to me after they say, I've never noticed all those connections before. So that was, affirming.
Well, that score is just full of all these little motives, right? For Maria and the different the games.
Absolutely.
And things like that. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, as we're finishing up, maybe let us know kind of what projects you're working on now, what things you have in the works, and how can people find you if they want to learn more about your work or kind of follow up with other questions about public music theory.
So my biggest project at the moment is I'm editing the Oxford Handbook to Public Music Theory, which I am really excited about. A couple of people who've already been guests on your show, Jenny Beavers and Jenny Snodgrass, are authors in that publication. The authors have responded enthusiastically, and it's moving forward at a great pace. So I'm really excited that will be published, and that I hope that document will be something from which springs a lot more thinking about public music theory. And then I have a couple of other things, contributions to some collections. So there's never a dull moment. There's plenty on there's plenty on my desk, but I think of course the big project is the Oxford Handbook. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can email me at djenkins@mozart.sc.edu, or you can find me on Facebook, Danny Jenkins. So I'd be happy to talk to you more.
So that's our show. Thank you so much for listening to Note Doctors, the Music Theory and Pedagogy podcast. We will be back with more interviews with professors and teachers who will be dropping all sorts of theory knowledge for your education, edification, and enjoyment. So until then, bye-bye.